As I said, so I kind of work at Sumo. I've been here for pretty much exactly 3 years now, to be honest. And I work here in Europe, and together with my colleagues here at Sumo, we are often talking to customers about AWS observability, because obviously there's a lot of customers out there using AWS, and the kind of the number of services being used there is as ever increasing. So what we're going to do today, and I thought I'll just give you a quick overview of the agenda. So what we're going to do today is just very briefly talk about Sumo Logic, not much at all, to be honest, but just one or two slides. And then we're going to kind of go through the AWS observability, and we're really going to be, I'm mainly going to be kind of showing it to you. So I got a few slides I want to take you through just to kind of explain what you can't see as in the demo, so to speak. But of course, what you do see in the demo is kind of going to be the most interesting thing, I guess. After that, we get some Q&A, and then I hope you want to get a spin of it yourself. So just as I said, sort of Sumo Logic, we provide this platform called continuous intelligence platform, or we kind of provide a service that really provides you with continuous intelligence. What we mean by that is being able to ingest or being able to analyze any kind of data that is effectively generated by the kind of systems that you're looking at, systems or applications or functions or whatever it is you're looking at. And traditionally there's been logs and metrics, but today with the microservices type architecture and all the other kind of modern type application components there, then you also need the kind of traces, the events, a lot of data that you didn't necessarily look at that much earlier. We can effectively ingest any data that's text-based into Sumo Logic. So you can have weather data, you can have IoT devices sending you data. There's no kind of limitations in what Sumo can do from that perspective. And the beauty with this is that we're going to manage all that sort of data pipelining, data management, indexing all the data, making it available for you to analyze it. And in many cases, we actually analyze it for you as part of the content we have out at the box. So once you've given us access to that data, the other thing you can focus on is effectively you and your colleagues there, regardless if they're developers or security people or wherever they're coming from, they can all kind of look at that sort of collected data in Sumo. And we make it really easy. And of course, this is sort of under the umbrella that you guys can work much more tightly together, look at the same data, although you may be looking at it from different perspectives. So this really kind of provides you with, quick content, quick sort of time to value, so to speak, and being able to analyze it in the way that you want to analyze it. Now, what our customers mostly do is looking at this from an operational perspective or security perspective. But depending on the data there, you can draw a lot of business intelligence from it as well. Not necessarily as a BI tool, but definitely a lot of value there to be able to prioritize your operational activities. Make sure you understand what that impact will be to you from a business perspective if this problem or if this issue is still sort of continuing. Under the hood, we also provide something we called global intelligence, which basically is a sort of collected intelligence from all our customers and from industry in general, that you can then draw, that you then can sort of draw upon, which basically means that we will not just tell you what you see, but effectively what all other customers are seeing and how that can be used as a benchmark for you. So that can be very useful when, when you look at something in operations or in security, it says number 42. And the question is, of course, is that high or low? Or what kind of, what does that mean really? That's what we can, that type of benchmark we can provide to you. And of course, the other aspect of Sumo as a platform is that, as I said, we can take on sort of any kind of machine data or any text-based data there. One of the kind of primary benefits that you're going to have is that it's completely elastic, and we can kind of scale fully with your use cases, right? So whether you kind of impacted by any kind of purchasing patterns or whatever it may be, we can scale with you in that sense. And we're not just talking about a couple of gigabytes here and there. We can actually take you up to sort of multiple hundreds of terabytes if you need to have that. And that's on a daily basis. We also, we do use a lot of machine learning and advanced analytics under the hood. If you have the need for it, we can also sort of connect you with notebooks and stuff like that, and really be able to do so, use kind of proper machine learning models that you provide yourself. So there's possibilities for that too, but we're hoping that we can actually identify the kind of use cases that you would want to run and make those out of the box, so to speak. And of course, with this comes a flexible licensing, because all of this kind of like, you want to be able to pay for what you use and not sort of anything more than that. And that's what we provide. From a security perspective, anything that goes into Sumo is fully secured and encrypted. Regardless, I mean, it's encrypted when it's in transit into Sumo, but it's also encrypted with kind of 200 AES-256-bit keys when it stays sort of in Sumo. So, and in addition to that, we also have sort of a lot of other certifications and attestations for various kind of regulations out there. And we pride ourselves to be the most sort of compliant or the most secured platform as a SaaS service in this kind of game, so to speak. And that really kind of provides you a lot of good benefits for that. And of course, you can draw on this as well. So when you're getting audited, you know that the platform underneath is fully audited, and that can be kind of used for you in that perspective as well. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of start to focus on the AWS observability solution. And actually, before we go into the demo, I also want to highlight something that comes out of our continuous intelligence report. And you can actually access it here as just search for continuous intelligence report. You can actually click on it and get it downloaded. And it's actually quite useful, because what it gives you is a snapshot of what we see from all our customers. So there's quite a lot of different topics being discussed. I'm just briefly going to take you to a few of those. And I think one of those, as you kind of saw on the slide there, is the kind of division of usage of different cloud services. And this is based on Sumo Logic customers. But, we do see a lot of customers using AWS, and Azure and multi-cloud is kind of increasing quite a lot. But we also see a lot of customers using on-prem. So on-prem is still very much the case, and regardless if customers are doing migration or not, but this is kind of something we do support quite heavily. The other thing we see is that the number of services, and we looked specifically at the AWS because of this, the number of data services that's being consumed by each and every customer is actually increasing over time. In 2018, it was actually down to like 7 or 8, I think it was. Then it went up to 15, and now it's actually up to 26. Some of the top used services is kind of EC2, S3, and all these, right? But the point with that is that, cloud adoption is increasing, no question about that. But we also see that the complexity of this is also increasing, because the number of different data services, the type of applications you have today, which is going to be more sort of microservices related or functions based, Lambda based, all of these things is making the network really work for you. And it's kind of having, part of it's stateless, part of it's stateful, and you have all these kind of connections everywhere, right? So you need a easy way to monitor this. And that's really where we're getting in with the AWS observability. And it's not just the observability. We actually also have something called Root Cause Explorer, which I will take you through as well. And in addition to that, we, of course, have all of the out-of-the-box dashboard that we already provide to you. So before we jump into the demo, I should mention that one reason for us to be able to do this is that by collecting not just the logs and metrics and traces and the kind of interesting data itself, but also by enriching all that data with the different sort of tags of what account this belongs to, what region it belongs to, what sort of namespace and entity, which basically means what data service and what sort of, if it's a database, it's effectively what table, or if it's a microservice, it's effectively the kind of service name and applications and stuff like that itself, right? So the enrichment of or let me say this, the metadata to support all the data you bring in is equally important as the data itself, because otherwise you would just be lost. And of course, we do this because we want to be able to help you look at this from a service perspective, not just from an infrastructure perspective. And that's why this is also very important. So with that, I'm going to jump into the demo. As you did see, and as I already said, is that we do have a lot of out-of-box content. You can easily kind of just install one of these applications. It's going to give you a lot of dashboards. If you take the Lambda example here, for example, you get a lot of dashboards that you will be able to see. Now, I've just opened it up already. So here I have the Lambda usage by sort of functions and all those kind of things. So it's easy to kind of see all this. Now, the challenge with this model is that if you're going to have dashboard for each and every sort of entity or for each and every thing you can think of, it's going to be a lot of dashboards. And that's why we kind of created the Explorer with the AWS Observability solution built into it. What this really means is that if you think about the Windows Explorer, as we probably all have experienced, right? On the left-hand side, you got some objects. In the Windows Explorer would be directories and maybe disks or whatever you had. In Sumo, these objects or this hierarchy is actually up for you to kind of build or, so we can effectively show you, first of all, we show you the different accounts. Most of our customers are having multiple accounts. And within each account, you're probably going to have a deployment within a specific region as well. Now, within the region, you're then going to have different data services like EC2, ECS, Lambdas, all of these kind of things that we typically see within customer environments. Now, on the right-hand side, you see the dashboard. You see the dashboard that we think is relevant for you to look at. So in this case, it's just an overview of what you would see on a regional basis. It could be very similar to what you would see on an account basis, but it could also be different. If we look at the account basis, just basically because I've added some more dashboards to it, I can actually sort of generate or create my own dashboards. So in this case, I got some operational overviews or service details and things like that. I'm going to save that for later because I got some things I want to show you before we do that. So as I said, most of our customers are having EC2 instances. No questions about that. Everyone uses that, right? So you want to go in, you want to see the instances, and yes, you can see those. There's always a kind of a number of weird names and so on, so it's not that easy to see. But just selecting my namespace with the EC2 data service, so to speak, I see the ones as in the instances that has a high CPU load or a high memory load. And you just by hovering over it, I see the spark line. I can kind of see some pattern there potentially, and that could be enough to kind of guide me. But I also see sort of a average consumption here from a CPU utilization or from a memory perspective. I can see a lot of different data points here, maybe too much in many cases, but it sort of depends on how large my environment is. And I can also filter this on different aspects. Now, pretty much anything I see here, and I'm going to take one of these with high CPU load, but I can click on it. And when I click on it, I get this kind of right-hand side Explorer view or a kind of entity browser, I should probably say, where I can delve straight into the logs for that instance. We're now looking specifically at an instance here, and I can go straight to the logs for that instance. The metrics are already shown here, so it's not much to kind of do from that perspective, but just being able to go to those logs, or, you know, maybe just look at the logs that has any kind of notion of error, you know, error, fatal, sort of exception, all of those kind of type of logs. But I can also go into dashboards that we would think you would be interested to look into. Because, I mean, this EC2 instance is maybe used in ECS, or it's maybe part of kind of what the service provided by API Gateway. So I have that possibility as well. Now, I can also go straight into a specific dashboard for this specific sort of instance. So let's do that, because again, finding that name on the list on the left-hand side is not always easy. Now I'm looking only at this kind of instance type here, and here I can see the kind of usage pattern over time. You know, how much of this is CPU idle versus system CPU and so on. And this is just a summary, right? So I can go straight in here and, you know, I can do things that you normally wouldn't be able to kind of that easily do in AWS. So I can look at my disk usage or my memory usage. You know, this is not sort of drawing on any sort of custom metrics, anything like that. So you just get it straight out of the box when collecting the kind of host metrics using Sumo. So the beauty with this is that you get it all at your fingertips, right? And it's very easy to kind of look at this. Now, let's look at something that's maybe more kind of closer to what many customers are using. So things like Lambda. You know, looking at a data service like Lambda, I'll see the kind of caller locations to this. I'll get a good view of the performance. And here I'm also time shifting this data. So I'm actually looking at the performance of all the Lambda invocations today versus yesterday. So because I'm looking at 24 hours is a bit busy, but let's go down to 15 minutes and it's going to be easy to kind of see that. You know, just by being able to look at the different ones here, so you see that some of this is it's kind of time shifted with 24 hours. Some of this is actually happening today. So easy to get a good view of what's happening here. I can also see things like which are my most used Lambda functions in general. You know, I can see it from the usage pattern or from the IAM users, or, you know, I can also look at it from sort of invocations per duration. So, you know, right now we're looking at pretty much everything, but I can, of course, just collect or select one sort of specific function to look at. Now we're looking at the after create function here, just by sort of clicking on it, and I see the invocation patterns here or the trend here. But maybe more interesting here as well is that I can look at this from a threat intel view. So one of the beauties with using Sumo is that we actually get a feed from CrowdStrike with sort of up-to-date actor or up-to-date sort of threat intel information, which we can then sort of collect and that we can associate or correlate with any kind of activities that you have in your sort of AWS environment or any environment for that sake. So the beauty with this is that I can now see that based on sort of IP addresses, I get a bad actor coming into my environment here. And it's actually coming from multiple different IP addresses, but it's still sort of the same actor. and I can see sort of this associated with, in this case, the after create, but I also have some other actors here too, right? So this is very good and you know, completely free to use, so to speak. So just being able to, you know, we do this out of the box, but this is things that you can use in any of your search queries as well. So really valuable and insightful in that sense. Now, there are other things you can look at as well. I'm not going to go through all of these things because it just would take us a lot of time. But I mean, there are kind of a lot of interesting things that you can do and look at, right? I do want to show you an example of when you kind of want to investigate something, because that's, of course, where we're here for. You want to use kind of AWS observability to identify things that you should be notified around. And of course, just looking at this screen is probably something that you picked up. So we see a lot of success. Oh, sorry. We see a lot of failures in this. And when looking at this list, I can see that this get billing information, this process here, this function is actually failing a lot. Now, maybe easier is to look at the visualization of this. You see the light blue is failures, while the dark blue is successes. And what kind of stands out is get billing information is only failing. You know, all the other functions here, they're kind of failing to some extent. It's maybe not a brilliant environment, but of course it is a demo environment. But this one fails completely. So, you know, you really want to kind of take a look at why is this happening, right? Now, what I can do is, again, I can filter on this. So just looking at the get billing information, I'm then going to see sort of, you know, everything's going to be directed for that sort of, function. But what I may want to take a look at in that case is kind of most frequent function operations here. So I can see that there's been a couple of updates taking place in the last 24 hours. And, you know, what I can do is kind of take you straight into the search of that. So we look at this. This is just the aggregated view. So what I want to do is take you into the real sort of raw data, so to speak. This is basically the log lines coming from it. Now, what I'm going to look at is the event name, and I'm going to look at the update function configuration. And I can, of course, kind of change this search and everything, but it's a lot of text there and maybe kind of a bit of a mouthful to begin with. But I can easily kind of just traverse this with kind of clicking on the names and using the filters instead. Now, what I can see here is that I do have 6 events, and I can't really see, in this case, AWS doesn't expose what has changed, but what I can see is that the user who's done the changes is a guy called Mark Smith. So in this case, because this function is failing every time, right, 100%, I would go and speak to Mark, because I would suspect that whatever change he did, or whatever he did within these changes, that probably has kind of caused this issue. And that's what I would want to investigate in that case. So that would probably make a lot of sense in sort of doing that, right? But yeah, so to some extent, I guess we've sort of sorted this problem, right? Now, I want to take you through a different kind of situation that we may be in. And that's something that a lot of customers are using as well. Most of your kind of workload is going to be you know, delivered through a load balancer. And, you know, like with the Lambda invocations, you're going to have a view of where your customers are coming from. And you can, of course, just kind of click into this as well, right, and get a lot more details here. So it's kind of easy to do that. And you can effectively get onto street level here on this one, right? So it's very detailed, but that's not what I'm going to show you. You see that there's a lot of kind of, from a latency perspective, you developing some latencies and stuff like that. And there's a lot of numbers, and it's a busy dashboard. But one thing that kind of does stand out here is, of course, these spikes. So here you can see that the production workload for the Sumo Logic service is kind of spiking up, and it's actually spiked twice in the last 24 hours. This is roughly around sort of 2:58 in the morning. So obviously no one is awake to actually take a look at that. So what I want to do here is I want to take you into the root cause explorer. And the root cause explorer is actually a way for us to identify metrics that is kind of deviating from normal or abnormal or kind of outliers to what we would expect. You can effectively see those two spikes here. So these are kind of definitely being seen here. And just by sort of hovering over it, you can see that it's been drifting away for 720% for 20 minutes, 2:40 to 3 o'clock. So pretty much the same, or it is the same sort of event that we looked at. And here's another one. What I want to do, though, is kind of give you a bit more details. I'll take you into the proper sort of root cause explorer. Now, I can filter all this data, and we can filter. This is not just for AWS, but also for Kubernetes and tracing in general, right? So I have a lot of filter capabilities. I can also sort of, we will build up an understanding of these metrics, or effectively, we will build up an understanding of all the metrics that we bring in from the AWS environment. In this case, we're looking at load balancers, but it could be any metric that comes in here. EC2 metrics, Lambda metrics, think of whatever you want there, and that will be brought in here. It will take some time. It will probably, I'm going to be fair to you and say it's probably going to take sort of roughly a week before we start to see sort of the real outliers and all those kind of things. But in the meantime, you can also kind of adjust for seasonality or stability or sort of duration of anything that you're looking at, or maybe even the drift of what you're looking at. So there's a lot of capabilities here that you want to kind of, that you can play around with. What you also can do here is that you can focus on specific services, specific metrics. But in this case, I'm actually going to remove the ELB app matrix here because I want to see what's happening in general in this environment with regards to those metrics. So I still have the metric here, but I'm now sort of opening up to look at more. As I said, I could focus on specific metrics. If you're looking for something, you can do that. Or you can even kind of make use of tags, as in AWS tags there, that you use in your environment that you bring into Sumo. So the metadata is important, as I said on the slide before. Now, even if I've opened this up and I still look at the 24 hours kind of timeline here, I still want to kind of focus on this one. So I can focus on it by just sort of hovering, or sorry, by just selecting that time frame within there. And I get these kind of views here. I can also kind of make those a bit more squared if you want to, if you prefer that. But basically, here is the ELB app that we looked at. So 720% drifting for 20 minutes at 2:40 in the morning. Now, what this really is built up by what Google spoke about in the kind of SRE, in the SRE handbook, so to speak. So their experiences and usage of metrics and all that is what we've kind of taken to heart here. So we look at those signals based on what they spoke about. So you get load, you get throughput, you get latency, and you get errors. That's typically how it develops. So typically you're gonna start to see some kind of load or throughput issue, and then you develop into latency issue and errors. So, and this is kind of quite telling here in this case, right? Because we get this ELB app error. Before that, in time, we have some latency issues. And even before that, we have some bottlenecks. So this is kind of a bit like, and I can just look at this. Here I see that this is an EC2 latency issue. And it's not just one system that had been experiencing this. This is actually coming from multiple different metrics in there. When I look at the bottleneck here, that's the same thing. I see CPU average on 4 different systems experiencing the same thing. I can delve into it and look specifically about that. And as I had before on the Lambda side, you always have sort of a time shifted value. So you can see the spike, but you can also see that normally this value or this metric would look the same pretty much over time, right? It doesn't have this kind of spiking behavior. So that's why we sort of picked this up. And of course, first of all, we seem to have a DynamoDB bottleneck. So read throttle events, something's been developing here. Now, what I can do from here is that I can just jump into the configuration of my DynamoDB database. So I'm going to take you back into the Explorer, where we can look at the sort of events that's taking place in the DynamoDB. So a bit similar to what we did before. And it's our challenge is that with demo environments, you're always going to have to kind of develop some kind of issue that we don't learn too well to be able to identify before we actually kind of do anything about it. So in this case, I'm actually using sort of similar technique to what we did before, but in this case, I'm going to look at the update table events that's taking place here. And here I can see that Ankit, who's one of my colleagues over in the US, you can see the name here, and you can see that he's actually changed the read capacity units. He's lowered that from 5 to 3 to 2. You can't see that it's lowered it to 2, but you can see that it's kind of right now it's 2. So I know that this should be 5, or, you know, we could sort of incorporate that information here. But basically, the change it did to a DynamoDB database was to lower that read capacity unit. That read capacity unit basically gave us, that basically gave us the kind of issue with the CPU loads increasing, and then you had sort of the latency in there, and then basically you started to see sort of ELB problems in the system. That's kind of how we use. So I'm sort of backtracking, but you know, basically that's kind of the event that was taking place here, right? Now, of course, if you got something like Sumo, you want to be alerted around this before this happens, right? So what you can do here is that when you start to use sort of AWS observability, we're going to get you a lot of alerts out of the box. We have not enabled those because we obviously don't know how you want to be alerted or who's going to be alerted. But this comes out of the box, so it's just for you to go in and enable this. In this case, you know, I could look at configuration changes for DynamoDB, or I could look for when you start to see an error rate based on your load, your 500 error rates. And in that case, you know, I can kind of tweak this to whatever you would want to look at. You know, basically what we're doing here is that we're taking two metrics, as in the 500s and the kind of request count, and we basically do a kind of division by these two to be able to show you that. And then for you now is just to decide, how do you want to be alerted? Do you want to have separate notification? Or do you want to group these notifications depending on what you're looking at? And then you would just say like, okay, you know, you can create your connections up here on this section or on this tab. But basically, we've already created a lot of out-of-the-box sort of connections here. So maybe you get some kind of chat boot, or maybe you want to have a Jira ticket being open, or Slack or Teams or whatever you want to use, right? And of course, you can send emails and things like that as well. So there's a lot of different ways we can sort of interface or integrate Sumo into whatever tools that you have in general there, right? So, I mean, this is kind of fairly straightforward. I'm hoping you've seen a lot of value in this. There is a lot of capabilities in Sumo, so we've just touched on a few. Just to summarize that, you know, as I said, there's a lot of out-of-the-box content and integration, so you can quickly get up to speed. I'm hoping, or I think it's kind of fairly simple to start to sort of collect. And, you know, I didn't touch too much on that, to be honest, but collecting the data from AWS in this case is not only actually showing you this. Not only do we enrich the data, but all of this is done through a CloudFormation template. So you just run one single CloudFormation template, and that's going to bring in all the data into Sumo with enrichment, with setup of the applications in Sumo, and with the collectors and the data sources and all those kind of things. So it is very simple to kind of start up using Sumo Logic, and it's all sort of documented. When you are in there, of course, being able to look at the estate you have in AWS, simplistically, wherever it is, whatever accounts or regions you're using, but also then let Root Cause Explorer identify any outliers when it comes to metrics. This just, we use a lot of machine learning and different kind of pattern analytics in there to observe and identify sort of deviations or anomalies in there. And then, of course, kind of being able to alert you of anything that you think should be kind of alerted upon before you experience any outages and things like that. I've sort of touched on this. Much of this is just what you've seen, although, as I said, scalability is hard to show you. Flexibility with licensing and stuff like that is also hard to show you. But this is kind of what our customers sees a lot, right? Just being able to get the data in there, fully trust Sumo from the perspective of that we can do the job for you, but also that you can trust the data in Sumo. Now, any kind of questions, I would be happy to respond to. Yeah, so there's one question here about pricing. Basically, to make it simple, is that you are paying for the amount of data that you ingest into Sumo. We got some metrics, most of the data is probably going to be log related, but of course, kind of metrics is being counted for as well as in the number of metrics that you send in, and also the retention. Metrics and retention is a very small part of the cost. So the majority of the cost is going to be around how much data you send into Sumo. Now, that said, you can be very flexible and very specific around what you send into Sumo. So of course you have the option of deciding what you want to see in Sumo, but even if you bring in sort of very big log lines, anything like that, you can just extract pieces from a log line. So maybe only like a value or a small part of that log line. Today's log lines with the kind of JSON and all that, they can be quite extensive, right? So you can just select a field of a JSON log line or something like that and bring in Sumo. So you don't need to bring in everything. So that makes it quite easy in the way that, effectively the data is or you can be kind of specific around that. What we also have there is that you have different data tiers in Sumo. So not all data is kind of, cost the same to sort of bring in Sumo. So you can even archive data that's routed through Sumo. So it's easy to re-ingest into Sumo if you need to, but otherwise you would just store it in an S3 bucket that is your own. The beauty with that is that we know that the data is there, but we don't necessarily kind of do anything with it. If you choose to, in a later stage, you want to bring in, re-ingest that data, so to speak, you can do that too. Now, between sort of real-time data and sort of archiving, we have two other data tiers, which are basically sort of frequent and infrequent. This is just a question of like, okay, do you want to pay for the data up front and make it available and be able to search for it? Or do you actually not really need to pay for it, but you're actually going to pay for the search you execute against it? So as I said, there's a lot of capabilities and flexibilities here with that pricing model. So I urge you to kind of take a look, speak to my colleagues or reach out to myself if you want to, and I can help you kind of take a look at that. There's also another question here with regards to tracing. And yes, we didn't really touch that much on tracing. What I can quickly just show you that within the solution. So first of all, you can see sort of a service map here with the different microservices type applications. And this is all sort of based on tracing data. And we support sort of the open telemetry framework for this. And the beauty with this is that having that microservices architecture, you can easily drill into this. And, again, you can pivot around logs, metrics, traces. In this case, I'm jumping straight into traces. And here I can go, let me take one that has some errors here. I can go straight into this, and here I see the traces, I see all the spans. I can even identify, even it's tricky, but I can identify the trace or sorry, the span that actually experiencing some issue. Not only can I identify it, I can go straight into the logs for this specific span. And this tells me that the coffee grains are out. So that's why the coffee machine can't sort of produce more coffee. A bit of deviation, but basically, yes, all of that can be done with Sumo. And of course, if you run sort of Kubernetes, will bring in the traces almost automatically. It's just one sort of configuration switch you need to kind of turn on. So I don't see any more questions, but if you have anything, then I'm happy to take that. Yep, sorry. Can this AWS output be combined with output from, say, Salesforce and Artifactory and consumed through a single interface? Yes. It's basically a question of writing a search query. In some cases, we've done this kind of for you. In some cases, you actually bring in multiple different data sources into the same search and you sort of correlating it there. In some cases, what you also can do is that maybe some of that data is going to be put into a lookup table so that when you run a search, you can also sort of do a lookup against that table. And that way you can then sort of enhance or enrich the data that, maybe you have some data from Salesforce or Artifactory that you want to add to this. So there's multiple ways of doing this, but absolutely, this is kind of something we and our customers do on a daily basis, to be honest. And that's kind of something that's, there's a lot of customers liking that capability. I realized that we've been running over quite a lot, so thank you for the time you kind of spent on the call. And as I said, actually, yeah, one more thing. If you haven't already, it's easy to kind of get started with Sumo. Just go to the sumologic.com website and you can start a free trial and you get full functionality for 30 days. So that way you should be able to kind of play around with everything I've showed you today. And we do more of these sessions as well, so keep an eye for any kind of me or my colleagues' sessions, and happy to talk to you directly. So if you get any questions, just send me an email or speak to any of my colleagues in Sumo Logic. Thank you very much for today and have a good day.